My daughter-in-law left my 5-year-old grandson at my house one night. My little boy whispered, "Grandma, Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home, but what she said made me call the police." Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The knock on the door came just after 10 o'clock, a frantic splintering sound that was utterly alien to the quiet rhythm of my retired life. It wasn't the polite rap of a neighbor or the cheerful tap of my son David. It was a sound of pure panic, a fist hammering against the wood as if trying to outrun a monster. I had been in my favorite armchair, a worn, comfortable vessel of faded chintz, with a book resting in my lap and a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the end table. The old grandfather clock in the hall had just chimed the hour, its deep sonorous bongs a familiar lullaby. Then came that terrible urgent knocking, and a jolt of ice-cold adrenaline shot through my veins. My first thought, a fleeting and absurd one, was of a fire. My second, far more chilling, was that something had happened to my son. I hurried to the door, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. When I peered through the peephole, the distorted, wide-eyed face of my daughter-in-law Jenna stared back. She was a mess. Her usually perfect blonde hair was a tangled wreck, clinging to her damp forehead. Her makeup was smudged, dark streaks running from the corners of her eyes. I fumbled with the deadbolt and swung the door open. "Jenna! Good heavens, what's wrong? Is it David? Is it Sam?" She didn't answer. She just pushed past me, half shoving my 5-year-old grandson Sam into the entryway. He stumbled, his little sneakers squeaking on the polished hardwood floor. Jenna's movements were jerky and unnatural, her eyes darting around the dimly lit hall as if she expected someone to jump out from the shadows. She smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and a cloying sweet perfume that couldn't quite mask the scent of fear. "I'm so sorry, Helen," she said, her voice a high, reedy whisper. "I am so sorry to do this so late. There's a work emergency, a big one. A server crashed, and they need all hands on deck. I have to go back. I don't know how long it will be." I looked from her panicked face to my grandson. Sam stood frozen in the hall, his small hands still clutching the strap of his dinosaur-themed backpack. His face was pale, his eyes enormous and dark in the soft light from the living room lamp. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at his mother with an expression of profound, heart-wrenching terror. "A work emergency? At this time of night?" I asked, my own unease growing with every second. Jenna worked in marketing. Her emergencies usually involved a broken link in an email campaign, not a late-night summons. "Yes. It's complicated," she said, waving a dismissive, trembling hand. She wasn't looking at me, her gaze fixed on the dark street behind her. "I have to go, I'm so sorry. I'll call you, I promise." She bent down, but not to hug Sam. She gripped his small shoulders, her knuckles white. "Be a good boy for Grandma, Sammy," she hissed, her voice a low, intense whisper that was meant only for him. "Remember what I told you." Not a word. Then she was gone. She turned and fled, not even closing the door all the way behind her. I watched her race to her car, a dark, unfamiliar sedan parked haphazardly at the curb, and peel away from the curb with a squeal of tires that echoed down the quiet, sleeping street. I closed the door, the sound of the deadbolt clicking into place feeling loud and final in the sudden silence. The house, which had been a sanctuary of peace just moments before, now felt charged with a strange, dangerous energy. I turned to my grandson. He was still standing in the same spot, a tiny silent statue in the middle of the hall. He looked up at me, and in his eyes I saw a fear so deep and so old, it had no place in the face of a 5-year-old boy. The story about a work emergency was a lie. I knew it with the certainty of a medical diagnosis. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. For 40 years I was a pediatric nurse. My life was a landscape of children's fears and pains. From the simple terror of a needle to the silent, soul-deep trauma of things no child should ever have to witness. I learned to read the subtle language of distress, the signs a child gives when their words have been taken from them. Averting their gaze, a sudden stillness, the way they hold their body. It's a language more honest than any spoken one. As I looked at Sam standing frozen in my hallway, all those decades of training, of instinct, came rushing back. He was a textbook case of a child in acute distress. His shoulders were hunched forward, his small body curled in on itself in a classic protective posture. His eyes, usually so bright and full of mischievous life, were dull and wide, constantly scanning the room as if assessing for threats. Hypervigilance. The words surfaced in my mind from 1,000 textbooks and 1,000 more real-life cases. "Come on, sweetheart," I said, my voice deliberately soft and calm, the tone I had used for years to soothe frightened children in the emergency room. "Let's get that heavy backpack off. You must be tired." I reached for him, but as my hand came near, he flinched. It was a small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was as loud as a scream to me. He flinched. My grandson, who would normally leap into my arms, had flinched away from my touch. I knelt down in front of him, keeping my hands visible and still. "It's okay, Sammy. It's just Grandma." He allowed me to help him out of his backpack. As I set it aside, I noticed his little hands were balled into tight fists, his knuckles white. He wouldn't unclench them. I led him into the kitchen, the bright, cheerful heart of my home. The room was filled with the familiar smells of cinnamon from my afternoon baking and the faint, clean scent of lemon from the polish I used on the counters. It was a room designed for comfort, for safety. "How about a nice glass of milk and one of Grandma's special cookies?" I asked, gesturing to the cookie jar on the counter. The jar was shaped like a smiling bear, and it was always filled with the chocolate chip cookies that were his absolute favorite. He just shook his head, his gaze fixed on the floor. His refusal was another blaring alarm bell. Sam never ever refused one of my cookies. Just then, a car drove down the street, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen window. The sound of the engine was ordinary, mundane, but Sam reacted as if a gunshot had gone off. He gasped and flattened himself against my leg, his small body trembling violently. He buried his face in the fabric of my slacks, his little fists still clenched. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic, terrified rhythm. I could feel the tremors running through his entire body. This was not the behavior of a child who was merely tired or upset about being dropped off late. This was the physiological response to trauma. The flinching, the hypervigilance, the startle reflex. It was all there. My years on the ward had taught me that these were not choices. They were involuntary reactions from a nervous system that had been overwhelmed by fear. I picked him up, his small body feeling impossibly tense and rigid in my arms. He clung to me, his face still hidden against my shoulder. I carried him into the living room and sat down in my armchair, rocking him gently, humming a wordless tune, just as I had done for countless frightened little patients. His mother's words echoed in my mind. "Remember what I told you." Not a word. She had silenced him. She had burdened him with a secret so terrible it had manifested as a physical tremor, a flinch, a visceral fear of the outside world. My professional mind was cataloging the symptoms, building a clinical picture of severe emotional distress, but my grandmother's heart was breaking. What in God's name had this little boy seen? The guest room at the back of my house has always been Sam's room. It's a quiet little haven, painted a soft sky blue, with a window that looks out onto my rose garden. The shelves are filled not with my own books, but with his well-worn copies of Where the Wild Things Are, and Goodnight Moon. The single bed is populated by a motley crew of stuffed animals, a one-eyed teddy bear, a floppy-eared dog, and a very serious-looking lion, that form his loyal silent army. I carried him into this sanctuary, his small body still tense in my arms. The room was lit only by a small dinosaur-shaped nightlight on the dresser, which cast a warm, gentle glow across the walls. I hoped the familiar surroundings, the quiet safety of this space, would act as a balm, a counter-agent to the terror that had him in its grip. I sat him down on the edge of the bed, and helped him out of his little sneakers and his jacket. His movements were stiff and robotic. He was still locked in that silent, frightened world, and I knew I couldn't push him. Forcing a traumatized child to talk is like trying to pry open a clenched fist. It only makes them hold on tighter. "Let's get you into your cozy pajamas, sweet boy," I said softly, my voice the calm, steady anchor I was trying to be for him. I pulled his favorite pair from the drawer, the ones with the little rocket ships on them. As I helped him change, I kept up a gentle one-sided conversation talking about the silly squirrel I had seen in the garden that morning, about the new book I had bought for us to read. I was creating a space for him, a quiet pocket of normalcy where he might, if he felt safe enough, finally be able to speak. He sat on the bed in his rocket ship pajamas, his knees drawn up to his chest, his arms wrapped around them. He looked so small, so fragile, swallowed up by the big, empty space of the room. I tucked the covers around him, the familiar ritual, a small act of love and protection. I arranged his stuffed animal army around him, placing the one-eyed bear in his arms. "There," I said, stroking his soft fine hair back from his forehead. All safe and sound. I sat on the edge of the bed, not looking at him directly but gazing at the dinosaur nightlight. I started to hum the lullaby I used to sing to his father when he was a little boy, a simple, repetitive tune that had soothed countless childhood fears. For a long time the only sounds in the room were my soft humming and the quiet ticking of the clock in the hall. Sam remained perfectly still, a silent, watchful presence under the covers. I thought perhaps he would drift off to sleep, the secret locked away for another day. I was about to stand up and leave him in peace, when I heard it, a tiny, almost inaudible sound, a sniffle. I turned to look at him. In the dim glow of the nightlight I could see that his big dark eyes were glistening with unshed tears. His lower lip was trembling. The dam was about to break. I didn't say anything. I just waited. He took a shaky, shuddering breath, his small chest hitching. He clutched the one-eyed bear so tightly his knuckles were white. Then he looked at me, his gaze direct and filled with a desperate 5-year-old's conflict. I could see the war raging inside him, his mother's strict command versus his overwhelming need to share the terrible weight he was carrying. He leaned forward, his movements so slight it was barely a rustle of the bed sheets. His voice when it came was a breath of sound, a fragile whisper that seemed to steal all the air from the room. "Grandma," he whispered, his little body trembling. "Mom said not to tell you what I saw at home, but—" He paused, taking another shaky breath, his eyes searching mine for permission, for safety. I gave him a small, encouraging nod. The secret held in by fear and loyalty was finally coming out. The silence that followed his hesitant whisper was profound. I held my breath, knowing that the next words from his mouth would change everything. The weight of his butt hung in the air, heavy and full of a terrible significance. He scooted closer, his little face just inches from mine in the dim dino-shaped glow of the nightlight. His eyes were wide, the pupils dark pools of fear. He was not just telling a story, he was reliving it. "Mommy has new friends, Grandma," he began, his whisper so soft I had to lean in to hear. "They come over when it's dark outside. They have angry voices." My heart constricted. I kept my own face placid, a calm, safe harbor for his words. "Angry voices?" I prompted gently. He nodded, his little head bobbing. "They talk loud, fast. Mommy gets a scared face when they're there, like when I broke the big blue vase." He was giving me the emotional landscape first, the fear and the tension, the things a child understands long before they can comprehend the details. There was a special game in the living room," he continued, his voice dropping even lower. He was struggling to find the right words to describe an adult world he didn't have the vocabulary for. On the big table, the shiny one. He meant the glass coffee table in Jenna's apartment. There were shiny little bags, he said, his eyes unfocused as he pictured the scene. Lots of them, like for my little army men, but shiny. Plastic baggies. My mind, the nurse's mind, made the clinical translation instantly. "And there was white powder," he whispered, his nose wrinkling. "It looked like sugar, Grandma, from the sugar bowl. But Mom got real mad when I touched it. She smacked my hand hard." He looked down at the back of his hand as if he could still feel the sting. My blood ran cold. The image was horrifyingly clear. A coffee table covered in small plastic baggies and a white, powdered substance, drugs. Not just for personal use, but in quantities that suggested distribution. My daughter-in-law in her own home, with her 5-year-old son present, was involved in packaging drugs. The thought was so monstrous, so far beyond the pale of what I had imagined, that I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. But he wasn't finished. The worst was yet to come. "One of the men," he said, his voice now trembling with a remembered terror. "The big one with the picture on his neck. He meant a tattoo. He had a scary toy, Grandma." "A scary toy?" I asked, my own voice tight. Sam nodded again, his eyes welling up with tears. "He kept it in his pants. Right here." He patted his own hip. It was black and shiny, like Daddy's drill, but not a drill. He showed it to Mommy and she started to cry. A firearm, a handgun, tucked into the waistband of a man with angry voices, in the same room as my grandson. The carefully constructed calm I had been projecting shattered into a million pieces. The shiny bags, the white powder, the scary metal toy. Sam's innocent, fragmented testimony had just painted a detailed, horrifying portrait of a drug packaging operation being run out of his home. An operation that involved at least one armed man. Jenna's frantic late-night drop-off suddenly made a terrifying kind of sense. It wasn't a work emergency. Something had gone wrong. A deal, a meeting. Something that had made her realize in a moment of panicked clarity that her son was in imminent danger. Sam finally broke down, the telling of the secret too much for him to bear. He collapsed against me, his small body racked with deep silent sobs. He cried without making a sound, a habit I knew children learn when they are taught that their tears are not welcome, that their distress is an inconvenience. I held him, my arms a protective shield around his trembling body. I rocked him back and forth, my mind racing, the clinical and the personal colliding in a maelstrom of horror and fear. This wasn't a case of poor judgment. This wasn't a mother falling in with a bad crowd. This was child endangerment of the most extreme and immediate kind. Sam was not safe, and I, his grandmother, was now the sole keeper of that terrible, dangerous truth. As I held my sobbing grandson in the dimly lit bedroom, my mind shifted from the emotional chaos of a grandmother to the cold, analytical framework of a pediatric nurse. For 40 years, my job had been to take fragmented pieces of information, a child's cry, a parent's anxious description, a set of vital signs, and assemble them into a coherent diagnosis. I was trained to see patterns, to connect dots, to translate the language of symptoms into the reality of a condition, and right now, I was diagnosing a situation of critical life-threatening danger. Sam's words, so innocent and unadorned, were my data points. Observation 1. Shiny little bags. My mind immediately pictured the small clear plastic baggies used for drug distribution. Not one or two, but lots of them. This wasn't about personal possession. The quantity implied intent to sell, to package, to distribute. Observation 2. White powder that looks like sugar. The possibilities were numerous and all of them terrifying. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl. The fact that it was out in the open on a coffee table, accessible to a curious 5-year-old, was a sign of breathtaking recklessness. Jenna's violent reaction to him touching it wasn't just about protecting the product. It was a panicked, guilty reaction. She knew the danger. She knew he could have ingested it, and the potential consequences were lethal. Observation 3. Mommy's new friends, with angry voices. This was not a social gathering. The anger, the tension Sam described, pointed to the high-stakes, violent world of the drug trade. These were not friends. They were business associates in a dangerous illegal enterprise. The man with the neck tattoo was not a casual acquaintance. Observation 4. A scary metal toy tucked in a man's pants. This was the most critical data point, the symptom that elevated the entire situation from dangerous to imminently lethal. A firearm, an illegal weapon, present and accessible in a volatile environment filled with drugs and angry people. The potential for violence was not a distant possibility. It was an immediate pressing threat. Jenna's tears upon seeing the weapon confirmed she understood this. She was in over her head, caught in something she couldn't control. My clinical mind assembled these points into a diagnosis, a professional assessment of the situation, acute child endangerment with high risk of imminent harm. The prognosis was grim. Children in these environments are exposed to a catastrophic range of dangers. There is the immediate risk of accidental ingestion of narcotics. There is the psychological trauma of exposure to violence, anger and fear, which can leave lifelong scars. And there is the ultimate risk, the one that made my blood freeze in my veins. The risk of being caught in the crossfire of a drug deal gone wrong. Jenna's frantic drop-off was no longer a mystery. It was a symptom. Something had escalated that night. Perhaps a threat was made. Perhaps the man with the gun had become more menacing. Her flight was not the act of a responsible mother removing her child from a bad situation. It was the panicked act of someone trying to hide a witness, or worse, someone who feared the violence was about to erupt at that very moment. I thought of all the cases I had seen in the ER. The children with unexplained bruises. The toddlers who came in with accidental overdoses because they'd found a parent's stash. The silent, withdrawn kids who had witnessed domestic violence. In every case my duty was clear, spelled out in hospital protocols and state laws, mandatory reporting. A healthcare professional, even a retired one, has a legal and moral obligation to report suspected child abuse or endangerment to the authorities. There was no gray area here. There were no extenuating circumstances. Sam's testimony was not a vague feeling or a suspicion. It was a clear, credible, eyewitness account of multiple felony crimes being committed in his presence, including the illegal possession of a firearm. My heart ached for Jenna, for the desperation that must have led her to this dark place. But my entire being, every ounce of my professional training and my grandmotherly love, was screaming one undeniable conclusion. Sam was in danger. Every moment he was in his mother's care was a moment he was at risk of dying. My diagnosis was made. Now I had to administer the treatment, no matter how painful it was going to be for our family. After Sam finally cried himself into a restless, twitching sleep, I gently laid him down in the bed, tucking his stuffed lion under his arm. I watched him for a long moment, his small face even in slumber creased with a worry no child should ever know. My resolve hardened into a core of cold hard steel. I backed out of the room, leaving the door ajar so I could hear him if he woke, and walked on trembling legs to the kitchen. I needed to call David, my son. He deserved to know what was happening to his own child, to the woman he had once loved. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had conducted my own secret investigations in a different lifetime, it seemed. My hand shook as I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It was well after 11 now, but I knew he would be awake. He was an architect, often working late into the night on his blueprints, the quiet hours his most productive. He answered. On the second ring, his voice tired but warm. "Hey Mom, everything okay? It's late." "David," I said, and my voice broke on his name. I had to stop, to take a deep shuddering breath before I could continue. The warmth in his voice immediately evaporated, replaced by sharp paternal alarm. "Mom, what is it? What's wrong? Is it Sam?" "Sam is here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "He's safe. He's sleeping. But David, something terrible has happened." I recounted the evening's events, my voice low and urgent. I told him about Jenna's frantic arrival, her disheveled appearance, her lies about a work emergency. Then, I relayed Sam's testimony, repeating his words as precisely as I could, using the clinical accuracy of a nurse giving a report. I didn't embellish or interpret. I just gave him the raw, horrifying data. He said there were shiny little bags. "David, lots of them. And a white powder on the coffee table." He said one of the men had a scary metal toy tucked in his pants. "A gun, David." Sam saw a gun. There was a profound, terrible silence on the other end of the line. I could hear his breathing, ragged and sharp. I could picture him in his brightly lit studio, surrounded by the clean, orderly lines of his work, his entire world collapsing around him. When he finally spoke, his voice was a choked, strangled whisper. "Oh my God, David," I pressed, my own voice gaining a hard, necessary edge. "You need to tell me what's been going on. I need to know." A flood of worried confessions poured out of him. He and Jenna had separated 3 months ago, and her behavior since had become increasingly erratic. She had quit her job. She was behind on rent. She had started hanging out with a new dangerous crowd, including a man with a criminal record he'd warned her about. He'd been sending her money for Sam, but he had a sick feeling it wasn't being spent on groceries or toys. "I've been so worried, Mom," he said, his voice thick with a mixture of anguish and guilt. "Every time I pick Sam up he seems sadder, quieter. I tried to talk to Jenna but she just screams at me, accuses me of trying to control her. I threatened to take her to court for custody but I was afraid of making things worse for Sam. I didn't want to put him through a nasty fight." His fear, his inaction was understandable. He was a father trying to navigate an impossible situation, trying to protect his son from the emotional fallout of a custody battle. But he hadn't known the full picture. He hadn't known about the drugs. He hadn't known about the gun. "It's worse now, David," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't about a nasty fight anymore. This is about keeping your son alive. He cannot go back to that apartment. Do you understand me? He is not safe with his mother." "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking completely. "I know, Mom. What do we do? What in God's name do we do?" His question was a plea. He was looking to me for the answer, for the strength to do what needed to be done. The call had confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't a one-time incident. This was a pattern, a dangerous lifestyle that Sam was trapped in. David's information provided the context, the backstory to Sam's terrifying testimony. My professional diagnosis was now supported by a family history. There was only one course of action left, and it was going to fall to me to take it. I hung up the phone with David, the silence of my kitchen pressing in on me. His final desperate question, "What do we do?" echoed in my ears. He was paralyzed by shock and guilt, a loving father trapped in an impossible situation. I knew that leaving the decision to him in this moment would lead to hesitation, to second-guessing, to a dangerous delay. The responsibility, I realized with a heavy, sinking heart, was mine alone. I walked to the living room window and looked out at the dark, sleeping street. The world outside was peaceful, orderly. But in my house, in my heart, a storm was raging. I was standing at a terrible crossroads, faced with the most difficult decision of my life. One path was the path of family. It was the path of trying to handle this internally. I could let David confront Jenna. We could try to reason with her, to get her into rehab, to convince her to give up custody of Sam until she was clean. It was the path of avoiding scandal, of keeping the police out of our lives, of trying to hold the fractured pieces of our family together. It was the path of loyalty to my son and even to my daughter-in-law, a woman I knew was deeply troubled and in desperate need of help. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this path was a minefield. It was paved with what-ifs and maybes. What if Jenna refused to listen? What if her drug-addled friends became violent when confronted? What if in the time it took us to act, something unspeakable happened to Sam? The image of the scary metal toy flashed in my mind. A gun changes the equation entirely. It introduces an element of lethal unpredictability that I could not in good conscience ignore. The other path was the path of the nurse. It was the path of protocol, of duty, of the promise I had made 40 years ago to always prioritize the well-being of a child above all else. This path was clear, direct, and brutal. It required me to pick up the phone, to report what I knew to the authorities, and to set in motion a chain of events that would irrevocably shatter our family. It would mean Jenna's arrest, a public record, and a legal battle that would leave deep, permanent scars. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like I was choosing to destroy my own daughter-in-law's life. I thought back to my long career. I thought of the children whose names and faces were forever etched in my memory. I remembered a little boy named Daniel, with big sad eyes and a series of accidental fractures. His parents were so charming, so convincing. The staff hesitated. We waited. We gave them the benefit of the doubt. A month later, Daniel was back in the ER, this time with injuries he would never recover from. Our hesitation, our desire to believe the best, had cost him his future. I remembered a teenage girl, withdrawn and silent, whose mother insisted her overdose was a suicide attempt. But something in her eyes, a flicker of terror when her father entered the room, told a different story. I made the call that time. I broke protocol and spoke to the girl alone. And the truth came pouring out. My intervention saved her, but it tore her family apart. Those memories, those ghosts of my professional past were my guides now. They were whispering a single undeniable truth. When a child's safety is on the line, there is no room for doubt. There is no time to wait. Hesitation is a luxury you cannot afford. I was Sam's only advocate tonight. David was too close, too emotional. Jenna was a danger to herself and to him. The system, the one I had worked within my entire life, was designed for exactly this kind of situation. It was impersonal, it was flawed, but it was also powerful, and it was the only thing that could guarantee my grandson's immediate safety. My choice became clear. It was not a choice between loyalty and betrayal. It was a choice between a potential future tragedy and a definite present action. I had to choose the child. I had to choose Sam. My heart felt like it was breaking in two. For my son, for Jenna, for the innocent family life we had all lost. But beneath the grief, my resolve solidified. I knew what I had to do. It would be the hardest phone call of my life. But it was the only one I could possibly make. With my decision made, a strange cold calm settled over me. It was the same detached professionalism that had allowed me to function in the most chaotic and heart-wrenching emergency room situations. The grief and fear were still there, but I packed them away in a mental box to be dealt with later. Right now I had a job to do. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down at the table. I didn't use my mobile phone. I used the old sturdy landline that hung on the wall, its coiled cord a tangible link to a more solid, dependable world. I needed that feeling of solidity right now. My finger, steady and sure, pressed the 3 numbers. 911. The voice on the other end was a young woman, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency? I took a breath. Hello, I began, my voice even and clear. My name is Helen Carter. I am a retired pediatric nurse. I need to report a case of suspected child endangerment. I deliberately led with my professional credentials. I knew it would immediately lend weight and credibility to my report. I was not just a hysterical grandmother. I was a trained observer. Okay, ma'am, the operator said, her tone already shifting to one of serious attention. Can you tell me your location? I gave her my address. The child is here with me now, I explained. He is safe. The danger is at his primary residence with his mother. Can you tell me the child's name and age? His name is Samuel Carter. He is 5 years old. And what makes you believe he is in danger, Mrs. Carter? This was the critical part. I closed my eyes, picturing Sam's small, terrified face, and I recounted his testimony, not as a rambling story but as a clinical report, a series of observed facts. The child was dropped off at my home approximately 1 hour ago by his mother, who appeared to be in a panicked state. The child himself is exhibiting classic signs of acute emotional distress, including hypervigilance and a pronounced startle reflex. He has disclosed to me that he witnessed events at his mother's apartment tonight that I believe constitute immediate and severe danger. I relayed Sam's words using his innocent language but framing it with my professional interpretation. The child described seeing lots of shiny little bags and a white powder on a coffee table. Based on his description, I have reason to believe this was a narcotic substance being prepared for distribution. He also stated that one of several men present, who were described as having angry voices, was in possession of what the child called a scary metal toy. He described it as black and shiny and said the man kept it tucked in his pants. Ma'am, as a medical professional, I have no doubt that the child was describing a handgun. I heard the distinct sound of typing on the other end of the line. Faster now. The operator's voice, when she spoke again, was clipped and all business. Okay, Mrs. Carter, a handgun. Are you certain that's what he was describing? I am, I said with absolute conviction. His description was detailed and his fear was genuine. I have no reason to doubt his account. We need the mother's name and address. I gave her all of Jenna's information, which I had written down on a pad of paper while talking to David. I also gave her David's name and number as the father. Okay, Mrs. Carter. The operator said, you've done the right thing. We are dispatching officers to your location now to take a formal statement. Please do not let the child leave your home. Do not contact the mother. An officer will be with you shortly. I understand, I said. Thank you. I hung up the phone and my hand fell from the receiver as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. The cold professional calm began to recede, and a wave of trembling, gut-wrenching reality washed over me. I had done it. I had set the wheels of the system in motion. There was no going back. I had just called the police on my own daughter-in-law. Based on the whispered words of my grandson, I prayed to God, with every fiber of my being, that I had done the right thing. The 20 minutes between the end of my 911 call and the arrival of the police officers felt like a lifetime. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of the leaves outside the window sent a fresh jolt of anxiety through me. I made a fresh cup of tea but left it untouched on the counter, its warmth unable to penetrate the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I sat at the kitchen table, my gaze fixed on the hallway that led to the guest room. Sam was still asleep, his breathing a soft, steady rhythm that was the only peaceful sound in the house. I was caught in a terrible limbo, suspended between the quiet of my home and the unknown chaos I had just unleashed upon my family. Had I overreacted? Had I misinterpreted a child's fantasy? The doubts which I had so ruthlessly suppressed came creeping back in. Then I saw the silent flashing lights, blue and red, painting surreal dancing patterns across my living room walls. A moment later, a quiet knock came at the door. Not the frantic hammering of Jenna's arrival, but a firm, solid, official sound. I took a deep breath and opened the door to 2 uniformed police officers. They were younger than I expected. One was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a calm, serious face. The other was a woman, shorter and wiry, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Their presence on my tidy suburban porch was both terrifying and, in a strange way, deeply reassuring. They were the embodiment of the system I had just put my faith in. Mrs. Helen Carter? The woman asked, her voice polite but direct. Yes, that's me, I said, my own voice a little shaky. Please, come in. They stepped into the entryway, their boots silent on the rug, their presence seeming to shrink the cozy dimensions of my home. They brought with them the cold, antiseptic scent of the outside world, a world of rules and consequences. I'm Officer Evans, the woman said, and this is my partner, Officer Riley. The dispatcher relayed the information from your call. Her eyes scanned my face, assessing me. I knew what she was looking for, signs of panic, of unreliability. She was trying to determine if I was a credible witness. I met her gaze directly. "Thank you for coming so quickly," I said, my voice steadying. "The little boy, my grandson, is asleep in the back bedroom. He's been through a great deal tonight." "We understand, ma'am, Officer Riley," the man said. His voice was a low, calming baritone. "We're not here to upset him. We just need to get a clear picture of the situation." I led them into the living room. I gestured for them to sit on the sofa, but they remained standing, a subtle but clear indication that this was not a social call. Officer Evans took out a small notebook. "Ma'am, on the call, you identified yourself as a retired pediatric nurse." "That's correct," I said. "For 40 years at the City General Hospital." I saw a subtle shift in her expression, a small nod of acknowledgement. My credentials mattered. It changed the entire dynamic of the interview. I was not just a concerned grandmother. I was a trained professional, a mandatory reporter, activating a system I understood. "And you believe, based on your professional experience and your grandson's statements, that he is in immediate danger?" she asked. "I believe his life is in danger," I replied, my voice clear and unwavering. He described a situation involving the packaging of narcotics and the presence of at least one firearm. "He is terrified. In my professional opinion, his testimony is credible and the threat is severe." The two officers exchanged a look. It was a brief, almost imperceptible glance, but it communicated a world of understanding. They had heard what they needed to hear. They believed me. The doubt that had been gnawing at me began to recede, replaced by a grim sense of validation. The system was working. The wheels were turning. Now they needed to speak to my grandson. "We'll need to speak with him, Mrs. Carter," Officer Evans said, her voice gentle but firm. "But we'll be as careful as possible. I have experience with this." I nodded, my throat tight. "I understand. I'll go and wake him." I walked back to Sam's room. He was still asleep, one small hand thrown over his head, the picture of innocence. Waking him up to face this felt like a betrayal, a violation of the sanctuary I had tried to create, but it was necessary. I sat on the edge of his bed and gently stroked his cheek. "Sammy," I whispered. "Sweetheart, you have to wake up for a minute. There are some people here who need to talk to you." He woke with a start, his eyes wide with a flash of the fear from earlier. "Who?" he whispered, scrambling to sit up. "It's okay," I soothed, pulling him into a hug. "They're friends. They're here to help, and Grandma will be right here with you the whole time." I carried him into the living room. Officer Riley, the tall, broad-shouldered man, had taken a discreet position by the hallway, his presence meant to be unobtrusive. Officer Evans was now sitting on the floor, on the thick Persian rug, making herself smaller, less intimidating. She had taken off her hat, and a small, kind smile was on her face. "Hi, Sam," she said, her voice soft and friendly. "My name is Kate. That's a really cool rocket ship on your pajamas." Sam, still clinging to me, peeked at her from the safety of my arms. He didn't speak. "I'm not going to stay long," Kate continued, her tone light and conversational. "I just heard you're a really good artist, and I was wondering if you could draw me a picture." She pulled a small, unlined notebook and a pack of colored pencils from her duty bag. It was a well-practiced, disarming technique. She wasn't an officer interrogating a witness. She was just a friendly woman who wanted to see some artwork. I sat down in my armchair with Sam on my lap, and Kate slid the notebook and pencils onto the coffee table in front of us. "Could you draw me a picture of your house?" she asked. "The one where you live with your mommy?" Sam hesitated, his eyes flicking from the pencils to my face. I gave him a small, encouraging nod. He slowly reached out and picked up a brown pencil. He began to draw, his small hand moving across the paper with the intense concentration of a child. Kate didn't press him. She just watched, occasionally offering a quiet word of encouragement. "Oh, that's a very tall building. What's that room there?" He drew the boxy outline of his apartment building. Then he began to draw the inside of the living room. He drew a small stick figure with a triangle dress for his mom, and a smaller one for himself. Then, his drawing took a dark turn. He picked up a black pencil and drew 3 large, angry-looking stick figures. He drew jagged, scribbled lines coming from their mouths. "Those are the angry men," he whispered, not looking up from his drawing. Kate's expression didn't change, but I saw her exchange another brief, significant glance with her partner. "They look very angry," she said calmly. "What are they doing?" Sam drew the coffee table. On top of it he drew a series of small lopsided squares. The shiny bags, he said, his voice barely audible. He then took a white pencil, an odd choice against the white paper, and scribbled all over the table. The sugar. Finally, he took the black pencil again. Next to one of the angry stick figures, the one with a scribbled tattoo on its neck, he drew a small dark shape. It was unmistakable. It was the shape of a handgun. He pushed the drawing away, his work complete. He had told his story again, this time not with his whispered words, but with the undeniable, heartbreaking clarity of a child's crayon drawing. Officer Evans looked at the drawing for a long moment. "Thank you, Sam," she said softly. "You are a very good artist, and you've been very, very brave." She carefully tore the page from her notebook, folded it and put it away. The most crucial piece of evidence had just been secured. While Officer Evans had been gently coaxing the truth from my grandson, Officer Riley had been speaking quietly into his radio in the hallway. The moment she stood up, the drawing safely tucked away, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The soft, gentle approach was over. The cold, efficient machinery of police work was now whirring to life. "Okay, Mrs. Carter," Officer Evans said, her full professional authority returning. "We have what we need from Sam for now. Could you put him back to bed? Then we'll need to get some more information from you." I nodded, grateful to get Sam away from the tense atmosphere. I carried him back to his room. He was exhausted, the emotional toll of the night's events finally catching up with him. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. I tucked him in, my heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like a physical pain. I had exposed him to this, but I had done it to save him. When I returned to the living room, a third person had arrived, a plainclothes detective, a weary-looking man in his 50s with a kind but tired face. Officer Evans introduced him as Detective Miller. "Mrs. Carter," the detective began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Thank you for your cooperation, and for your courage. It's not an easy call to make." "It was the only call to make," I replied, my voice firm. He nodded, a flicker of respect in his tired eyes. "The officers have relayed the child's testimony. We now consider this a high-priority, high-risk situation. The mention of a firearm elevates everything. We need to build a case, and we need to do it fast. Anything you can tell us, no matter how small it seems, could be crucial." I sat down with him at my dining room table, the two uniformed officers standing discreetly in the background. For the next hour I gave them everything I had. I started with the basics: Jenna's full name, her date of birth, her address and apartment number, her license plate number. Then I recounted the information I had gotten from David. I told them about her increasingly erratic behavior since the separation, her financial troubles, her association with a new dangerous crowd. I gave them the name of the new boyfriend David had mentioned, a man named Rick, though I didn't have a last name. My son was afraid to act, I explained, not to make excuses for him but to provide a complete picture. He was worried about a messy custody battle, about the effect it would have on Sam. He didn't know the full extent of the danger. Detective Miller listened patiently, taking meticulous notes in a small leather-bound notebook. He asked clarifying questions, his inquiries sharp and to the point. "Did your son ever witness any drug use himself?" "No, never. Just Jenna's erratic behavior and secretive phone calls." "Did she ever ask you for money?" "Frequently. I always gave it to her for Sam's sake. Now I'm not so sure where it went." Every piece of information I provided was another brick in the wall of probable cause they were building. The child's eyewitness testimony was the foundation, the undeniable core of their case. But my testimony, my son's worried observations and Jenna's known history of instability provided the crucial context. It created a narrative that transformed Sam's story from a shocking isolated event into the terrifying culmination of a long downward spiral. "Okay, Mrs. Carter," the detective said finally, closing his notebook. "I think we have enough to proceed. You've given us a very clear picture." He stood up and the uniformed officers straightened, their demeanor alert. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "Now," Detective Miller said, his face grim, "we obtain a warrant, and then we pay a visit to your daughter-in-law's apartment. For your grandson's safety and for your own, I need you to stay here, lock your doors and do not, under any circumstances, try to contact Jenna or David. We will handle it from here." The case was built, the evidence was gathered. The machine I had set in motion was now moving under its own power, heading for a direct and unavoidable collision with my family. After Detective Miller and the officers left, a profound and heavy silence descended upon the house. It was nearly 2 a.m. The flashing lights were gone. The quiet suburban street once again cloaked in an ordinary, deceptive darkness. But inside my home nothing was ordinary. The air was thick with the residue of what had happened, charged with the terrifying potential of what was yet to come. As instructed, I locked the front and back doors, sliding the deadbolts into place with a heavy, final-sounding thud. The locks were not to keep intruders out. They were to keep me in, a willing prisoner in my own home, waiting for a verdict on a trial I had initiated. I made my way back to the guest room and pulled a small armchair from the corner, placing it beside Sam's bed. I couldn't leave him. I couldn't sleep. All I could do was sit and watch the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of his small chest, a sight that was both a comfort and a torment. He was safe, here, with me, but his mother, my daughter-in-law, was out there, in the path of the storm I had just unleashed. The hours that followed were the longest of my life. My mind, usually a quiet and orderly place, became a torture chamber of second-guessing and what-ifs. Every time a car drove down the street, my heart would leap into my throat. Was it Jenna, coming to demand her son back? Was it the police, returning with terrible news? I replayed the entire night in my head, over and over again, Sam's whispered words, my call to David, the 911 operator's calm voice, the officers' serious faces. Had I done the right thing? The question hammered at me relentlessly. I had followed my training, my instincts, my duty as a mandatory reporter, but I had also, perhaps, destroyed my family. I pictured Jenna's face, not the panicked, hollow-eyed version from tonight, but the happy, smiling Jenna from years ago, the young woman who had fallen in love with my son, the glowing mother who had cradled a newborn Sam in her arms. Where had that woman gone? What desperation had driven her to this dark and dangerous place? I felt a surge of anger, hot and fierce, at the men she had let into her home, into my grandson's life. They were the true villains, the predators who had exploited her weakness. But beneath the anger was a deep, aching sorrow for Jenna herself, for the life she was about to lose. I thought of David alone in his apartment, waiting for a call, caught in the same agonizing limbo as me. I had taken the decision out of his hands, but I had not spared him the pain. I had only delayed it. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 3, then 4. The sky outside the window began to lighten, bleeding from a deep inky black to a bruised pre-dawn purple. A new day was coming, a day that would be forever marked by the events of this terrible night. I must have dozed off at some point. My head slumped against the back of the armchair, because I was startled awake by the sound of birds beginning their morning chorus in the garden. For a blissful, disoriented second, I forgot what had happened. It was just a normal morning. Then the full weight of the night came crashing back down on me, and the anxiety was so intense it felt like a physical pressure on my chest. I looked at Sam. He had kicked off his covers in his sleep and was curled into a small ball, his stuffed lion held tight against his chest. He looked so peaceful, so utterly innocent, and in that moment, looking at his beloved sleeping face, I knew with a certainty that cut through all the doubt and fear. I had done the right thing. Whatever the consequences, whatever the fallout, whatever the cost to our family, I had kept this little boy safe. I had answered his silent, terrified cry for help. I had been his fierce, protective grandmother. Whatever happened next, that was a truth I could hold on to. The night was over. Now I had to face the day. The confirmation of my darkest fears came not in a frantic, panicked phone call but in the cold procedural language of a police detective. It was just after 7 a.m., the sun was streaming through the kitchen window, casting long, cheerful shadows across the floor, a cruel contrast to the dread that had settled in my stomach like a stone. Sam was still asleep. I was on my third cup of coffee, my nerves stretched to the breaking point when my phone finally rang. It was an unknown number. Helen Carter? The voice was the gravelly, tired tone of Detective Miller. Yes, I answered, my hand gripping the receiver so tightly my knuckles were white. Yes, this is she. Detective Miller, ma'am. I'm calling to update you on the situation regarding your daughter-in-law, Jenna Carter. I held my breath. Based on the probable cause established by your testimony and the evidence provided by your grandson, he began, his voice all business. A judge signed a no-knock warrant for Miss Carter's residence in the early hours of this morning. A tactical team executed that warrant at approximately 5:30 a.m. A no-knock warrant. A tactical team. The language of a primetime crime drama was now the reality of my family's life. I pictured a team of heavily armed officers, battering down the door to the small second-floor apartment where I had attended Sam's third birthday party. The scene inside the apartment was consistent with your grandson's description. The detective continued, a world of professional understatement in his voice. We found Miss Carter along with a male individual identified as Richard Rick Slater, in the residence. They were in the process of packaging a significant quantity of a substance that has field-tested positive for cocaine. We recovered numerous small plastic baggies, a digital scale and other paraphernalia. He paused, and I could hear the faint rustle of papers on his end. We also recovered a loaded, unregistered 9mm handgun from underneath a sofa cushion in the living room, within easy reach of the packaging station on the coffee table. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. It was all real. Every whispered word from Sam's mouth, every fear that had plagued me through the long dark night was true. The shiny bags, the white powder, the scary metal toy, all of it. Both Miss Carter and Mr. Slater were taken into custody without incident. The detective concluded, they've been charged with possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, conspiracy and felony child endangerment. Mr. Slater is also facing a weapons charge. The litany of charges was a hammer blow, each one a nail in the coffin of the life Jenna had known. Possession with intent to distribute, conspiracy, felony child endangerment. These were not the mistakes of a troubled young woman. They were the serious life-altering crimes of a drug dealer. What? What happens now? I stammered, the words feeling thick and clumsy in my mouth. Now the legal process begins, he said. Child Protective Services has already been notified. Given the circumstances, your grandson will be placed in emergency custody. Since he is already with you and the father is aware and supportive, it's likely he will remain in your care for the foreseeable future. A caseworker will be in contact with you and your son later today. He was still talking, explaining the next steps, the protocols, the procedures, but I was barely listening. My mind was fixed on a single terrible and undeniable fact. If Jenna hadn't, in a moment of panicked clarity, brought Sam to my house last night, he would have been there. He would have been in that apartment when a team of armed police officers battered down the door. He would have witnessed the arrests, the shouting, the chaos. He would have been at the center of a violent, terrifying whirlwind. The raid had been the inevitable explosive conclusion to the dangerous game Jenna had been playing, and my grandson had been just inches away from being caught in the blast. The call with Detective Miller had provided the grim factual confirmation of the night's events. It was a clinical report of arrests and evidence, a dispassionate summary of the raid that had shattered my family, but it was the second call, the one that came a few minutes later, that brought home the full devastating emotional reality of what had happened. It was the detective again, his voice softer this time, less procedural. Mrs. Carter, he said, and I could sense he was no longer speaking as just a police officer, but as a man, perhaps a father himself. I wanted to call you back personally. I've had a chance to review the full preliminary report and speak with the officers who first responded to your home. I waited, my heart a heavy, aching weight in my chest. The drawing your grandson made, he said, his voice laced with a tone of weary admiration. It's remarkably accurate. The layout of the room, the location of the drugs on the table, even the description of Slater's neck tattoo. It's all corroborated by what we found at the scene. He paused, and I could hear the deep, tired sigh on the other end of the line. I've been doing this job for 25 years, Mom. I've seen more terrible things than I care to remember, and I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that these situations, they rarely end well. The combination of drugs, money, and a loaded firearm is a powder keg. It's not a matter of if it explodes, but when. His words painted a vivid, terrifying picture of the life Sam had been living, the danger he had been in every single day. Your daughter-in-law and this Slater character were in deep with some very dangerous people, he continued. We believe something was about to go down last night, a deal, a dispute. We don't know for sure yet, but Jenna's panic, her decision to bring Sam to you, it was likely because she knew the situation was about to become violent. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea washing over me. Sam had been just hours, maybe minutes away from witnessing something truly horrific. I need you to understand this, Mrs. Carter, the detective said, his voice low and earnest. That little boy was in mortal danger. Your call, your decision to act based on his testimony very likely saved his life. Saved his life. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. All the doubt, all the guilt, all the agonizing fear that I had made the wrong choice, that I had betrayed my own family, evaporated in that single clarifying moment. The terrible weight I had been carrying all night lifted, replaced by a profound, tearful, and utterly grim sense of validation. "It might not feel like it right now," the detective said, his voice full of a hard-won wisdom. "And there's a long, difficult road ahead for your family. But you did the only thing a loving grandparent could have done. You listened to a child when no one else would, and you got him out. You did good, Mrs. Carter. You did real good." Tears, hot and silent, began to roll down my cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness or of grief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. The professional in me had made a diagnosis, the grandmother in me had acted out of love, but it was the detective, the stranger on the other end of the phone, who had finally given me the absolution I so desperately needed. "Thank you, detective," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for telling me that." "Just doing my job, ma'am," he said. "You take care of that brave little boy." The line went dead. I sat at my kitchen table in the bright morning sun and cried, not for the family that was broken but for the grandson who was, against all odds, alive and safe. An hour later my son arrived. I heard his car pull into the driveway, the crunch of tires on gravel, a sound that seemed to herald the beginning of our new fractured reality. When I opened the door, David looked like a man who had aged a decade overnight. His face was a wreck of sleeplessness, anguish, and a raw, ragged gratitude that was painful to behold. He didn't speak. He just walked past me, his eyes scanning the house until he found what he was looking for. Sam was in the living room, awake now, sitting on the rug and quietly building a tower with his wooden blocks. The events of the night before seemed to have receded, leaving behind a fragile, quiet little boy. David crossed the room in 3 long strides and fell to his knees. He wrapped his arms around his son, burying his face in Sam's fine, soft hair. His broad shoulders shook with deep, silent sobs. It was the sound of a father's worst fears realized and his greatest hopes miraculously fulfilled, all at once. Sam, startled at first, seemed to understand. He dropped his blocks and wrapped his small arms around his father's neck, holding on as if he were a life raft in a stormy sea. "It's okay, Daddy," he whispered, his little voice full of a wisdom no 5-year-old should possess. "We're at Grandma's. We're safe now." I stood in the doorway, my own tears blurring my vision, and gave them their moment. This was the scene that mattered. This was the reason for the terrible choices of the night before. A father and a son, safe and together. After a long time, David stood up, his arms still wrapped protectively around Sam's shoulders. He looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "The detective called me," he said, his voice hoarse. "He told me everything. He told me what you did." He crossed the room and pulled me into a fierce, tight hug. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being strong enough to do what I was too afraid to do. You saved him. You saved my son." There was no blame in his voice, no anger at the destruction I had brought upon our family. There was only a profound and desperate gratitude. Later that day, the caseworker from Child Protective Services arrived. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman with a gentle smile and sad eyes that had seen too much. She sat with David and me at the dining room table and explained the process. Sam was now officially in the temporary custody of the state, but given the circumstances, he would be placed with me. David, as the father, would have full access and would begin the legal process of petitioning for sole custody. It was all so clinical, so procedural. Forms were signed, questions were answered, a future was decided in the neat black ink of a ballpoint pen. Our family, once defined by love and birthdays and Sunday dinners, was now defined by case numbers and custody agreements. It was fractured, broken, perhaps irreparably. But as I watched David later that afternoon, sitting on the floor with Sam, the two of them building an elaborate castle of blocks, their heads bent close together, their quiet laughter filling the room, I knew that it was not entirely destroyed. The foundation was shattered, but a crucial part of it had been saved from the wreckage. We had lost Jenna to a darkness we couldn't fight. We had lost our illusion of a happy, normal family. But we had not lost Sam. In the midst of the devastation, we had saved the one thing that truly mattered. Our family was fractured, yes, but it was also, in the only way that counted, saved. The months that followed were a quiet, painful journey of rebuilding. My house, once a place for holiday visits and weekend sleepovers, became a permanent sanctuary, a calm, predictable harbor for a little boy who had seen too much of life's storms. David essentially moved in as well, sleeping on the pull-out sofa in the den, unwilling to be more than a room away from his son. Together the three of us began to piece together a new definition of family. The legal proceedings involving Jenna were a distant, ugly storm that we did our best to shield Sam from. The charges against her were serious, the evidence overwhelming. Faced with a long prison sentence, she accepted a plea bargain that included mandatory inpatient drug rehabilitation and a lengthy period of probation. The family court hearing was a quiet, somber affair. I sat in the back of the small courtroom, watching as David, strong and steady, stood before the judge. Jenna was there, looking healthier than I had seen her in years, but with a deep, hollow sadness in her eyes. When it was her turn to speak, she did something I never expected. She tearfully and voluntarily relinquished her parental rights, agreeing to give David sole custody of Sam. Then she looked at me, her gaze direct and full of a painful, hard-won clarity. "I want to thank Helen," she said, her voice trembling but clear. She made a call that night that I was too weak and too sick to make myself. She saved my son, and in a way she saved me too. She broke down in sobs, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of the woman my son had once loved, a woman who had been lost but who was now perhaps on the long road to being found. Life settled into a new normal. Sam began to heal, the nightmares became less frequent. He started kindergarten, made new friends, and discovered a passion for finger painting. The tense, hyper-vigilant little boy who had flinched at every loud noise was slowly replaced by a happy, thriving child, whose laughter once again filled the rooms of my house. The trauma was still there, a scar on his young soul, but it was no longer an open wound. One sunny afternoon, about a year after that terrible night, I was in the garden with Sam. He was helping me plant tulips, which mostly involved him digging in the dirt with a small trowel and making a glorious mess. He suddenly stopped digging and looked up at me, his face serious. "Grandma," he said, his 5-year-old mind, now 6, still processing the past. "Is Mommy all better now?" I sat back on my heels and chose my words carefully. "Mommy is working very hard to get better, sweetheart. It takes a long time, but she loves you very, very much." He seemed to accept this. He went back to his digging for a moment, then looked up again. "I'm glad I told you the secret," he said, his voice small but certain. "You're a good listener." I pulled him into a hug, dirt and all, and held him tight. My love for my grandson, I realized, was not a soft, gentle thing. It was a fierce, protective, and sometimes ruthless force. That night, I hadn't just been a grandmother. I had been a pediatric nurse, a mandatory reporter, a witness. I had been the person who had to make an impossible choice. I had called the police on my own family, an act that felt like a betrayal. But as I held my happy, healthy grandson in my arms, I knew it for what it truly was. It was the ultimate act of love, a grandmother's answer to a child's desperate, whispered cry for help, and it was the best call I ever made.